The strongest bond in the Brown family isn't marriage. It never really was. It's the bond between the kids. 18 children, born to 4 different mothers, raised across separate households in one of the most unconventional family structures in America. And somehow, against all odds, they became a real family to each other. Closer to each other in many cases than to the father at the supposed center of it all. And that, I think, is one of the most beautiful and most revealing truths this whole show ever accidentally captured. So tonight, I want to talk about the Brown siblings, the family within the family, and why the kids ended up choosing each other over the man whose name they all share. Let me start by appreciating how unlikely this bond even is, because it's genuinely remarkable. These 18 kids didn't all grow up under one roof in a simple nuclear family. They came from 4 different mothers, lived in different households, and were folded into a complicated, sprawling structure where the lines of who belonged to whom could easily have created division. You could very easily imagine these kids growing up as near strangers, half-siblings who shared a father but not much else, divided by the same household lines that divided their mothers. And yet, that's not what happened. What happened, by every appearance, is that these kids became genuine siblings to each other, bonded, loyal, close. That outcome wasn't guaranteed. It was, in a way, something they built. And here's the part that I find most telling. As the family fractured, as the marriages dissolved and the adults split into camps, the kids' bond with each other seems to have held, and in many cases strengthened. When the structure around them came apart, the siblings had each other. They were the constant. Mothers grew distant from each other. The father grew distant from many of them, but the brothers and sisters remained a unit. That tells you something profound about where the real emotional center of this family actually was. It wasn't Kody. It wasn't the marriage. It was the horizontal bond between the kids. The relationships that ran sideways across the family rather than up to the patriarch. Let me talk about why the kids gravitated toward each other rather than toward their father, because I don't think it's a mystery. Children gravitate toward where they feel safe, seen, and understood. And who understands what it was like to grow up a brown kid better than another brown kid? They shared an experience that literally no one else on earth shares. The experience of growing up in this specific, unusual, very public family. They understood each other's childhoods from the inside. They could talk about things no outsider could fully grasp. That shared experience is an incredibly powerful bonding force. The siblings became each other's safe harbor precisely because they were the only people who truly got it. And in the absence of a father who, by many accounts, wasn't deeply present for a lot of them, that sibling bond filled the space. Now, I want to connect this to the favoritism pattern we've discussed so much, because it's relevant and revealing. We've noted that, by every visible sign, Kody was closest to and most present with the children in Robin's household. So picture the effect of that on the other kids. The children who got less of their father's presence had every reason to lean into each other instead. When the vertical relationship, the one with dad, is thin, the horizontal relationships, the ones with your siblings, become everything. The favoritism that left so many of the kids feeling secondary may have, ironically, strengthened their bond with one another. They had each other precisely because, in many cases, they didn't fully have him. The father's absence helped forge the siblings' presence in each other's lives. Let me be fair and add nuance, because the sibling bond isn't perfectly uniform, and we've seen evidence of that. We've talked about the Gwendolyn and Peyton rift, a real public division between 2 of the siblings. So I'm not painting a picture of 18 kids in perfect, conflict-free harmony. That would be naive. Like any large family, there are closer bonds and more distant ones, alliances and tensions, agreements and disagreements. What I'm describing is the overall pattern, the general truth that the sibling generation, taken as a whole, formed strong bonds with each other and became a genuine family unit, even with the inevitable internal frictions. The Gwendolyn-Peyton rift is the exception that proves the rule, notable precisely because it stands out against a backdrop of general sibling solidarity. Let me talk about what this bond gave these kids, because I think it's the reason so many of them turned out as well as they did. We've discussed how grounded and capable many of the Brown children became, and I'd argue their bond with each other is a big part of why. When you grow up in a chaotic or unstable environment, having siblings you can rely on is one of the greatest protective factors there is. Your siblings become your support system, your reality check, the people who remind you that you're not alone and that you're going to be okay. The Brown kids had that in each other. Through the divorces, the public scrutiny, the family upheaval, and the profound losses, they had a built-in support network of people who understood and loved them. That's a powerful buffer against the hardest parts of their childhood. There's something almost poignant about the idea that the children built the family the adults failed to sustain. Think about it. The whole premise of this family, the entire vision of plural marriage, was supposed to be about creating a large, loving, unified family. The adults pursued that vision, and ultimately couldn't hold it together. The marriages dissolved. The unity collapsed. But the children, without trying to, without it being anyone's grand plan, actually achieved a version of the loving, unified family the adults aimed for. The kids became the thing the lifestyle promised and failed to deliver. The real togetherness, the real family bond, ended up existing not in the marriage at the center, but in the sibling relationships at the edges. The kids succeeded where the structure failed. Let me reflect on what it means that they're closer to each other than to Kody specifically, because that's the pointed part of all this. It's a quiet verdict on Kody's fatherhood, delivered not in words, but in the simple geometry of the family's relationships. When children consistently turn to each other and away from a parent, it tells you something about how present and safe that parent was for them. The kids' tight bond with each other and their general distance from their father aren't two separate facts. They're two sides of the same coin. The closeness they found in each other is, in part, a measure of what they didn't find in him. It's not that they're incapable of close relationships. Clearly they're not. It's that the close relationships they built were with each other, not with the man who was supposed to be at the center. And let me give credit where it's due, which is to the mothers, because I don't think the sibling bond happened by accident. We've talked about how the kids are generally close to their mothers, and I suspect the mothers played a real role in fostering the bonds between the children too. The wives, whatever their conflicts with each other, seem to have largely raised their kids to value family, to look out for one another, to be siblings rather than rivals. That kind of sibling solidarity is often cultivated by mothers who insist on it, who model it, who refuse to let the household divisions poison the children's relationships with each other. So the beautiful bond among the Brown kids is, in part, another quiet achievement of the women who raised them. The mothers gave their children to each other. I think there's a universal truth here that resonates far beyond this one family. In so many families that go through hardship, divorce, dysfunction, loss, it's the sibling bond that becomes the thing that endures. Parents age, marriages end, but your siblings are the people who travel through life alongside you, who share your origin, who knew you when. The Browns are an unusually large and unusually public example of something true for families everywhere, that brothers and sisters are often the longest and most resilient relationships of our lives. The Brown kids, having been through more than most, seem to understand that instinctively. They've held on to each other. And that holding on may be the single healthiest thing in the entire family. So when I step back and look at the Brown siblings, here's what I see. I see 18 kids from 4 mothers who, against considerable odds, became a genuine family to each other. I see a bond that strengthened as the structure around it collapsed, the kids becoming each other's constant when everything else fell away. I see the children quietly achieving the loving unity the adults promised and failed to deliver. And I see, in their closeness to each other and their distance from their father, a gentle but unmistakable verdict on where the real heart of this family always was. The marriage was never the center. The siblings were. And in the end, the most important love story this show ever told wasn't between a husband and his wives. It was between 18 brothers and sisters who chose each other. Let me make this concrete, because the bond shows up in real, visible ways if you know where to look. Watch how the siblings show up for each other's milestones. The weddings, the births, the big life moments. Watch how they appear in each other's lives, support each other publicly, defend each other when one of them takes heat. Several of the Brown kids have used their own platforms to stand up for a sibling or to express love and pride for one another. These aren't the gestures of half-siblings who barely know each other. They're the gestures of people who consider each other real family, full stop. The proof of the bond isn't in any single dramatic moment. It's in the steady accumulation of showing up, the ordinary evidence of people who have genuinely chosen to be siblings to one another, rather than just technically related. What strikes me most is how the bonds cross the household lines, because that's the part that didn't have to happen. Janelle's kids and Christine's kids, Mary's child and Robin's kids, these are children of different mothers who could easily have stayed in their separate lanes, loyal only to their own household. Instead, many of them formed close cross-household bonds, brothers and sisters across the maternal lines, treating the whole sprawling group as one family, rather than four subfamilies. That cross-pollination is the clearest sign that the kids rejected the divisions that shaped the adult generation. The mothers may have ended up in separate camps. The kids, to a meaningful degree, refused to. They reached across the lines that divided the household and claimed each other anyway. That's a choice, and it's a generous one. I have to acknowledge, gently, the role that shared grief has played in deepening these bonds, because it's part of the story even though it's painful. This is a family that has known profound loss, and one of the few things that can be said about grief is that it binds the people who share it. The Brown siblings have weathered hard things together, and the hardest of those things create a closeness that nothing else can. There's a particular kind of bond among people who have grieved together, who have held each other through the worst, who carry a shared sorrow that outsiders can't fully touch. I raise this with care, not to dwell on the pain, but because it's part of why these siblings are so tightly woven. They've been through things together that most families never face, and they came through them holding on to each other. Let me talk about how the siblings protect each other, because it reveals the protective instinct at the heart of the bond. In a family this public, every member is exposed to commentary, criticism, and scrutiny. This channel and this whole genre included. And what you often see from the Brown kids is a protective instinct toward one another. When one sibling is struggling or being criticized, others tend to rally. They look out for each other in the harsh glare of public attention. That protectiveness is a sign of a genuine bond, the kind where you've got each other's backs against the world. Growing up famous without consent created a shared vulnerability, and the siblings responded to that vulnerability by becoming each other's protectors. They learned early that the only people who truly understood the strangeness of their lives were each other, and they guarded that understanding fiercely. Now, hold the sibling bond up against the adult fractures we've spent so much time discussing, because the contrast is the whole point. The adults gave us the mansion money disputes, the unequal payouts, the broken trust between Mary and Robin, the suspicion between Mary and Janelle, the estrangements. The adult generation, in so many ways, came apart at the seams. And running underneath all of that adult wreckage, quietly, was a generation of kids largely holding together. It's almost as if the family had two parallel stories unfolding at once. The adults fracturing on top, the children bonding underneath. And the children's story is by far the more hopeful one. Where the adults' relationships were corroded by money, favoritism, and a difficult marriage, the kids' relationships were built on shared experience and mutual understanding. And those proved far more durable. I think this bond also has real implications for the future of the family, and they're encouraging ones. Because the next generation, the grandchildren, are growing up as cousins within this tight sibling network. The children of the Brown kids will have a whole web of aunts and uncles who are genuinely close to each other. So even as the relationship with Kody may be thin for many of them, these kids are being born into a real, connected, extended family on the sibling side. The cousins will grow up together. The family, in its horizontal form, will continue and even expand. So the bond the Brown siblings built isn't just a feature of their generation. It's the foundation of whatever this family becomes going forward. The future of the Browns, as a connected family, runs through the siblings, not through the patriarch. Let me reflect on what it says about resilience, because I keep coming back to how impressive this is. These kids were handed an extraordinarily complicated situation. Multiple mothers, a divided household, a very public and unconventional family, divorces, scrutiny, and profound loss. By every reasonable expectation, that's a recipe for a fractured, distant set of siblings who grow up and scatter. Instead, they built something cohesive and loving. That's not luck. That's resilience. And it's a kind of active achievement. They could have let the divisions of the adult world become their divisions. They chose instead to be a family to each other. In a story full of people failing to hold relationships together, the kids quietly succeeded at the very thing the adults couldn't manage. and they did it while carrying more than most families ever have to. So if there's one thing I'd want people to take from all of this, it's that the Brown story is not, fundamentally, a story of a family destroyed. On the surface, with the divorces and the distance and the disputes, it can look that way. But underneath the surface, a real family survived, just not the one anyone was watching for. The marriage didn't survive, but the family did, in the form of 18 siblings who became, and remain, a genuine unit. That's a more hopeful and more accurate way to understand what this show actually documented. It started as the story of a plural marriage. It ended as the story of the family those children built among themselves. And that family, the one the kids made, is the one that's going to last. And maybe that's the quiet lesson this family offers anyone watching from their own complicated home. You don't get to choose the structure you're born into. The Brown kids certainly didn't. But you do, eventually, get to choose who your family really is, who you show up for, who you hold on to, who you build your life alongside. The Brown siblings were handed a family that came apart, and rather than inheriting its divisions, they quietly built a new one out of each other. That's available to all of us, in our own way. The family we're given is the starting point, not the verdict. And watching these 18 siblings choose each other again and again through everything is a reminder that the most important family bonds are often the ones we actively decide to keep, long after the structures that were supposed to hold us together have fallen away. So I'll turn it over to you, because I'd love for the comments on this one to celebrate the good. Which Brown sibling relationship is your favorite to watch? The bond that warms your heart the most? And here's the bigger question for the comments. Do you agree that the kids ended up building the loving, unified family that the plural marriage promised but never delivered? Tell me where you land, because these are the conversations that remind us there's real heart in this story, and I read every comment. If you want me to do a full breakdown of the sibling alliances, who's closest to whom across the 18 kids, let me know, and I'll map out the family within the family. And if you appreciate that we highlight the genuinely beautiful parts of this story and not just the drama, then do me a favor and subscribe, because the heart of this family deserves as much attention as its heartbreak. And that balance is exactly what we aim for here.